the weight of blood and shadows of betrayal. The early morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of my childhood home, casting muted shadows on the hardwood floor. It had been years since I'd stepped foot here, yet the air seemed heavy, with a familiar tension, as though the walls themselves remembered the arguments and reconciliations they had witnessed over the decades. My father sat at the head of the table, his gray, streaked hair a testament to years of toil and worry. My mother hovered near the stove, stirring a pot of coffee as though the ritual could ease the silence between us. Across from me sat my brother Jason, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly as though he were preparing for a prayer, or perhaps a confession. It wasn't just a table. It was an arena. The air between us crackled with unspoken accusations, the kind that could burn away bridges faster than they could be built. "Ethan," my father began, his voice low and deliberate. "You can't keep carrying this anger in your heart. It's not good for you." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the room. "Is that what you think this is about, Dad? My health?" Jason flinched, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. The shame on his face was almost satisfying. Almost. My mother sat down, a steaming mug in front of me, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "We're a family," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And families, they forgive." I locked eyes with her, searching for something, anything that might make her understand the depth of the wound I carried. "Family doesn't do what he did, Mom." Jason finally raised his head, his eyes glistening. "Ethan, Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't you dare say you're sorry again. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that you slept with my wife, that you—" My voice broke and I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay in control. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed my marriage, my trust, everything." The room fell into a heavy silence, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. My mother's lips quivered as though she wanted to say something, but no words came. It was my father who finally broke the quiet. "Son," he said, leaning forward, "I know what Jason did was wrong, unforgivable even. But life is too short to carry this bitterness. He's your brother. Blood is thicker than water." I slammed my hand on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "Don't give me that blood is thicker than water nonsense. Do you even know the full saying? It's, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. Jason broke that bond, and now you want me to just forgive him? Pretend it didn't happen?" My mother sat down beside me, her eyes brimming with tears. "We're not asking you to forget, Ethan, but holding on to this anger is eating you alive. We can see it, can't you?" I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. Maybe they were. Right, anger had been my constant companion for so long that I didn't know who I was without it. But forgiving Jason felt like condoning what he had done, like telling him, and myself, that it was okay. Jason cleared his throat, his voice hoarse. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Ethan. I don't even deserve to be sitting here. But I need you to know that I hate myself for what I did. Every day, I wake up and wish I could take it back. But I can't. All I can do is try to make things right." I studied him, his once confident demeanor now reduced to something small and broken. A part of me wanted to believe him, to let go of the weight that had been crushing me for years. But another part, the part that had replayed his betrayal over and over in my mind, refused to budge. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said finally, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But maybe I can try." The words hung in the air, a fragile offering that could shatter with the slightest touch. My parents exchanged a glance, their faces a mixture of relief and lingering sadness. Jason nodded, his shoulders slumping as though a heavy burden had been lifted. though not entirely removed. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't even a resolution, really. But it was a start. As I walked out of the house later that day, the winter air biting at my skin, I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't for Jason. It wasn't for my parents either. It was for me. A way to reclaim the pieces of myself that I had lost to anger and grief. And though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I was finally ready to take the first step. The weight of blood and shadows of betrayal. A deeper exploration. The winter morning sun pressed weakly through the curtains, its light doing little to warm the cold space between us. The dining table felt impossibly large, each of us marooned, on our separate islands of guilt, shame, and unspoken words. I stared at Jason across the table, his face a mask of quiet agony. He wasn't the confident brother I grew up with, the one who could charm anyone in a room with a sly grin and an easy laugh. No, this man was someone else entirely. A man hollowed out by regret, his charisma replaced by something brittle and tired. And yet, looking at him, I felt no satisfaction in his suffering, only a deep, gnawing emptiness. Ethan's turmoil. How do you forgive the unforgivable? This question haunted me, echoing in the corners of my mind where my anger lived. Forgiveness wasn't just a decision. It was a process, a road I wasn't sure I wanted to walk. I had been a good brother to Jason. At least I thought I had. I was the first to defend him when he got into trouble at school, the one who patched him up when he got into fights. We weren't just brothers. We were a team. And yet, when it mattered most, he betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. There was a time when I thought I knew myself, a steady, dependable man who valued loyalty above all else. But Jason's betrayal shattered that image, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a person I no longer recognized. Did I still value loyalty? Could I still believe in it? Or had I become something else entirely? A man defined by his bitterness, a shadow of who I once was. As I sat there, my parents' pleas washing over me, I wondered if forgiveness was even possible. Not for Jason's sake, but for my own. Could I ever let go of this weight I carried? Or would it consume me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left? Jason's perspective. Jason couldn't meet my eyes. He stared down at his hands, his fingers twisting a napkin into a shredded mess. I wondered what was going through his mind, if he felt even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. For Jason, guilt wasn't a sharp, sudden thing. It was a dull ache, a constant reminder of his own failure. He had spent years trying to outrun it, drowning it in work, distractions, and half-hearted apologies. But no matter what he did, it was always there, waiting for him in the quiet moments. He had loved my wife, or at least he thought he had. At the time, it felt like love, a fiery, all-consuming passion that made him forget everything else. He convinced himself that it was different, that what he felt for her was real in a way that justified the betrayal. But now, looking back, he saw it for what it truly was. Selfishness. A momentary weakness that destroyed everything. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Jason said, his voice breaking. "But I need you to know. I'd do anything to undo what I did." Anything! I wanted to believe him. But trust was a fragile thing, and once broken, it was nearly impossible to mend. The parents' dilemma. My parents, meanwhile, were caught in a web of their own making. They wanted to fix this, wanted their family to be whole again. But their motivations weren't as simple as they seemed. My father, ever the pragmatist, believed in the sanctity of family above all else. To him, forgiveness was a duty, a responsibility that came with being part of something larger than oneself. He had seen too many families torn apart by grudges, too many lives ruined by stubbornness. But he also knew that asking me to forgive Jason was asking for more than I might be able to give. My mother's reasons were more personal. She had seen what anger had done to me, how it had changed me into someone unrecognizable. She wasn't just asking me to forgive Jason. She was asking me to save myself, to let go of the anger that was eating me alive. But in doing so, she risked invalidating my pain, minimizing the depth of the betrayal I had endured. "Ethan," she said softly, her hand resting on mine, "we just want you to be happy again. You don't have to forgive. Jason, for his sake, do it for yours." Her words were well-meaning, but they felt hollow. How could they possibly understand what I was going through? They hadn't been betrayed by their own blood. They hadn't lost the person they loved most to the one person they thought they could trust. The first step, the hours dragged on, the conversation looping in circles. My father appealed to reason, my mother to emotion. Jason, for the most part, stayed silent, his guilt rendering him a passive participant in his own redemption. In the end, the choice was mine. Forgiveness wasn't something they could force upon me, no matter how much they wanted to. It had to come from within, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. But as I left the house that day, the winter air biting, at my skin I realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about Jason. It wasn't even about my parents. The fragility of progress. Jason and I started meeting once a week for coffee, an unspoken ritual that neither of us had explicitly agreed upon, but both fell into naturally. It was always the same cafe, the same corner table by the window. Sometimes, we talked about our parents or about Lily and how she was growing up too fast. Other times, we just sat in silence, the weight of our history filling the air between us. One morning, Jason surprised me with a photo album. He slid it across the table, his expression hesitant. "What's this?" I asked, flipping it open. "It's for Lily," he said quietly. "I figured, if she ever asks about our childhood, this might be something she'd like to see." The album was filled with pictures, us as kids, grinning and gap-toothed, family vacations, Christmas mornings spent tearing into presents. There were even some of my ex-wife, though Jason had carefully chosen ones from before their affair. It was a thoughtful gesture, one that spoke volumes about how much effort he was putting into rebuilding our relationship. "Thanks," I said, my voice soft. "She'll love it." Jason smiled, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "I hope so." Jason's struggles. While I was beginning to make peace with Jason, I knew he was still battling his own demons. He had lost more than just my trust. His relationship with our parents had been strained, his friendships had dwindled, and his career had taken a back seat as he wrestled with his guilt. One evening, he called me out of the blue. His voice was tight, strained. I just needed to talk to someone," he said. "It's been a rough day." I wasn't sure what to say. For years, I had been the one struggling, the one carrying the weight of his betrayal, but now, hearing the vulnerability in his voice, I realized he had been carrying his own burden all along. "Tell me about it," I said, leaning back in my chair. He hesitated, then began to talk about the sleepless nights, the moments when he doubted he'd ever be able to make things right. It was the first time he had truly opened up to me, and while it didn't erase the past, it made him feel human. Lily's questions. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Lily, now 8 years old, asked the question I had been dreading. "Dad," she said, her big brown eyes staring up at me, "why don't Uncle Jason come over more? Grandma says he's your brother, but you don't talk to him much." I froze, the words catching in my throat. How could I explain something so complicated to a child? How could I make her understand without burdening her with the pain of what had happened? "Uncle Jason and I had a fight," I said finally. "A big one. But we're trying to make things better." She tilted her head considering this. "Did he say sorry?" "Yes," I said softly. He did. And did you forgive him? I hesitated, the weight of her question pressing down on me. I'm working on it. She nodded, as if that was answer enough. Then she smiled and said, You should forgive him, Dad. He's family. Her words stayed with me long after she had run off to play. Children had a way of seeing things simply, cutting through the layers of pain and complexity to the heart of the matter. Jason was family, no matter how much he had hurt me. And maybe, just maybe, Lily was right. A step toward reconciliation. Months later, I invited Jason to a barbecue at my house. It was the first time he would be around my close friends since everything had happened, and I could tell he was nervous. He arrived early, carrying a tray of desserts he had picked up from a bakery downtown. You didn't have to bring anything, I said as I took the tray. He shrugged, offering a small smile. It's the least I could do. The evening was awkward at first. My friends, who knew bits and pieces of what had happened, were polite but distant. Jason, for his part, kept to himself, hovering near the grill and making small talk when necessary. But as the night wore on, the tension began to ease. By the time we sat down to eat, Jason was laughing at one of my friend's jokes, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of discomfort, unspoken words hanging in the air. But it was a start, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that reconciliation was possible. A final confrontation. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jason turned to me, his expression serious. Ethan, he said, his voice steady, I need to ask you something. I tensed, bracing myself. What is it? Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? He asked, his eyes searching mine. Completely, I mean. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between us. I don't know, I admitted. I want to. But forgiveness isn't something you just decide to do. It's something you have to feel, and I'm not there yet. Jason nodded. Rebuilding the foundation. The barbecue became a turning point, not just for Jason and me, but for the family as a whole. My parents, who had been walking on eggshells for years, began to relax in Jason's presence. My mother even started inviting him to more family gatherings without checking with me first. At first, I bristled at her assumption. But as time went on, I realized I didn't mind as much as I thought I would. It wasn't that things were perfect. Far from it. There were still moments when resentment bubbled to the surface, moments when I had to bite my tongue to keep from bringing up the past. But there were also moments of connection, fleeting but real, that reminded me why I had decided to try in the first place. Jason and Lily's bond, Lily, as it turned out, was the glue holding us together. She adored Jason in the way only a child can, with an unconditional love that wasn't burdened by the weight of history. He became her favorite playmate, the one who would spend hours helping her build elaborate Lego castles or teaching her how to throw a baseball. One afternoon, I found the two of them sitting in the backyard, deep in conversation. Lily was showing Jason a drawing she had made, a messy, colorful depiction of our family. "Who's this?" Jason asked, pointing to a figure in the corner. "That's you, silly," Lily said, giggling. "You're part of the family now." Jason's face softened, and for a moment, he looked like he might cry. "Thanks, kiddo," he said, pulling her into a hug. "That means a lot." Watching them from the kitchen window, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't jealousy, exactly, but a strange mix of pride and sadness. Jason was becoming the uncle I had always hoped he would be, and while that didn't erase the past, it made me believe in the possibility of a better future. A conversation with my parents. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed and Jason had left for the night, my parents asked to speak with me. We sat around the dining room table, the same table where so many arguments and tears had played out over the years. "We're proud of you, Ethan," my father said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "You've come a long way." I shrugged, not sure how to respond. "I'm just doing what I can." My mother reached across the table to take my hand. "You've shown so much strength, more than we ever could have imagined, and we know this hasn't been easy for you." Her words caught me off guard, and for a moment I couldn't speak. My parents had always been supportive in their own way, but they rarely expressed their feelings so openly. "I'm not doing it for him," I said finally. "I'm doing it for Lily, and maybe for myself too. Carrying all that anger, it's exhausting." My father nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they've done." I looked at him, surprised by his insight. "Did you read that in a book or something?" He chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just lived long enough to figure it out." A letter from Jason. A few weeks later, I received another letter from Jason. This time, it wasn't an apology. It was a reflection. "Ethan," it began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, that forgiveness isn't something you can force, and that it takes time. I know I can't rush you, and I don't want to. But I want you to know that every day, I'm trying to be better. Not just for you, but for myself, too. I've started volunteering at a local shelter, working with people who are struggling to rebuild their lives. It's humbling, and it's made me realize how much I've taken for granted. I don't know if this will mean anything to you, but I wanted to share it because I think of you often, of how much I hurt you, and how much I admire the strength you've shown in moving forward. Whatever happens between us, I'll always be here. I'll always be your brother. And I'll always be grateful for the chance to try." Reading his words, I felt a strange sense of peace. Jason wasn't trying to erase the past or earn my forgiveness through grand gestures. He was simply trying to be a better person. And that was enough for now. Ethan's growth. As the months turned into years, I found myself letting go of the anger I had carried for so long. It wasn't a conscious decision, but a gradual process, a softening of the edges, a quiet acceptance of what had been and what could be. Jason and I were never going to have the relationship we once had, but that didn't mean we couldn't have something meaningful. We became partners in a way, working together to navigate family events, support our parents as they aged, and be there for Lily as she grew up. And in the process, I discovered something unexpected. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing what had happened or pretending it hadn't hurt. It meant acknowledging the pain, learning from it. Let us continue with a deeper exploration of the emotional aftermath and the growth within this story. We'll dive into how Ethan's relationship with Jason evolves beyond words, how their family dynamic transforms as years pass, and how forgiveness, imperfect and fragile, ultimately shapes their lives. The years that followed. Time, as it always does, moved on. Lily grew into a young woman with a bright, unyielding spirit, and her bond with Jason became a cornerstone of her adolescence. She didn't know the full story of what had transpired between us, but she didn't need to. She simply saw Jason as the uncle who showed up, who cheered at her soccer games, helped her with science projects, and listened intently when she spoke about her dreams. For me, those years were a quiet reckoning. Jason's presence in Lily's life forced me to confront my lingering resentment, not as a brother, but as a father. I wanted my daughter to grow up surrounded by love, not weighed down by the bitterness I had carried for so long. And so, I began to make a conscious effort to let go, little by little, day by day. Jason's redemption in action. Jason continued to rebuild his life with a determination I couldn't help but admire. His work at The shelter expanded into a full-time role, where he became a mentor to others struggling to piece their lives back together. It wasn't lost on me that his efforts to help others mirrored his own journey of redemption. One evening, he invited me to an event at the shelter, a celebration of the community's progress. I hesitated at first, unsure if I wanted to step into his world. But something in his voice, a quiet vulnerability, convinced me to go. The room was filled with people of all ages and backgrounds, their stories etched in their faces. Jason introduced me to some of them, and as I listened to their words of gratitude for his support, I saw a side of my brother I hadn't fully understood before. He wasn't just trying to make amends with me, he was trying to make amends with the world. Later that night, as we stood outside the shelter, Jason turned to me. "Thanks for coming," he said. "It means a lot." I nodded, my chest tight with emotion. "You've done good work here, Jason. I'm proud of you." His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked like the little boy I used to protect. That means more than you know." A family rediscovered. As Jason and I rebuilt our relationship, the rest of the family followed suit. My parents, who had once seemed so fragile under the weight of our conflict, began to thrive. Family dinners became a regular occurrence again, filled with laughter and the kind of light-hearted arguments that felt like home. There was one evening, years after the betrayal, when my father raised a toast at the dinner table. "To family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We've been through hell and back, but we're still standing. And that's something worth celebrating." We clinked glasses, the sound ringing out like a promise. It wasn't a promise of perfection or a guarantee that everything would always be smooth, but it was a promise to keep trying, to keep showing up for each other, no matter what. Lily learns the truth. When Lily turned 18, I decided it was time to tell her the truth about what had happened between Jason and me. She was old enough to understand, and I didn't want her to stumble upon the story from someone else. We sat on the couch, a photo album open on the coffee table between us. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my words measured and careful. "Lily, there's something I need to tell you about your Uncle Jason and me. It's not an easy story, but I think you deserve to know." As I explained the betrayal, the affair, and the years of pain that followed, she listened quietly, her eyes wide but thoughtful. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "That must have been so hard for you," she said finally. "But I'm glad you forgave him. I can't imagine our family without him." Her words, so simple, yet profound, brought tears to my eyes. "It wasn't easy," I admitted, "and I'm still working on it. But you're right. He's part of our family, and I'm glad he's here." Ethan and Jason, a new chapter. By the time Lily went off to college, Jason and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We weren't the inseparable brothers we had once been, but we had found a new kind of closeness, one built on honesty, respect, and a shared commitment to moving forward. One evening, as we sat on the porch of my house, Jason turned to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything we've been through, and I just want you to know, I don't take any of it for granted. Your forgiveness, your willingness to let me back into your life, it means everything." I looked at him, the brother who had hurt me, the man who had worked so hard to make amends. "I know, Jason, and I don't regret it." For the first time in years. Epilogue. The weight of forgiveness. Years passed and life continued to unfold in its unpredictable way. Lily graduated college with honors and pursued a career in social work, inspired by Uncle Jason, as she often said. She had seen how someone's life could be rebuilt from the ashes, and she wanted to be part of that transformation for others. Watching her step into adulthood, I couldn't help but feel pride. not just for her accomplishments, but for the compassionate, resilient person she had become. Jason's role in Lily's wedding. When Lily got engaged, one of her first requests was for Jason to walk her halfway down the aisle alongside me. At first, I wasn't sure how to feel about it. The aisle felt symbolic, something sacred between a father and his daughter. Sharing that moment with Jason stirred up old feelings I thought I had buried. But when I saw the joy in Lily's eyes as she made the request, I couldn't say no. This wasn't about me or Jason. It was about her and the family she had grown up in, the family we had fought so hard to mend. On the day of the wedding, Jason stood beside me, looking nervous as we waited for Lily to appear. "You okay?" I asked, glancing at him. He gave me a shaky smile. "Just overwhelmed. I never thought I'd get to be part of something like this." When Lily appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in her white dress, Jason and I both teared up. Together, we walked her toward her future, a united front in a way I never thought possible. A quiet reconciliation. As Jason and I grew older, our relationship settled into something quiet and steady. We didn't need grand gestures or profound conversations anymore. It was the small things that mattered. The weekly phone calls to check in, the shared laughs at family gatherings, the comfortable silences when words weren't necessary. One afternoon, as we sat fishing by a lake near my home, Jason turned to me and said, "You know, I've spent so many years trying to make up for what I did, but I think I've finally realized something." "What's that?" I asked, reeling in a small fish. "That forgiveness isn't about undoing the past," he said, his voice soft. "It's about making the future better, and you've given me the chance to do that. I can't thank you enough." I looked at him, the lines on his face deeper now, his hair streaked with gray. "You've done the work, Jason. I just gave you the space to do it." He smiled, and we returned to our fishing, the moment passing as easily as the breeze rippling across the water. A legacy for the next generation. When my grandchildren were old enough to ask questions about family, I told them the story of their great-uncle Jason. I didn't shy away from the hard parts, the betrayal, the pain, the years of anger and distance. But I also told them about the redemption, the forgiveness, and the healing. Family isn't perfect, I told them as we sat by the fire one evening. We make mistakes. We hurt each other. But we also love each other enough to try again. And that's what makes us strong. One of my grandsons, a thoughtful boy of 10, asked, "Do you think Uncle Jason ever forgave himself?" The question gave me pause. "I think so," I said, after a moment. But forgiveness, whether it's for yourself or someone else, isn't a single act. It's something you work at every day, and Jason worked hard. The children nodded, their young minds processing the weight of my words. I hoped that, as they grew, they would carry this lesson with them, that forgiveness is hard, but it's also worth it. That people can change, and that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. Jason's farewell. When Jason passed away in his 70s, the family gathered to celebrate his life. The funeral was packed with people whose lives he had touched, former shelter residents, co-workers, friends, and, of course, family. Lily gave a eulogy that brought the room to tears. "My Uncle Jason wasn't perfect," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But he taught me that imperfection isn't the end of the story. He showed me that people can grow, that mistakes can be mended, and that love, real, unconditional love, is always worth fighting for." As I sat in the front row, her words washed over me, a reminder of how far we had come. Jason and I had started as brothers, drifted apart as enemies, and found our way back to each other as something more profound. Two flawed men who chose love over anger, forgiveness over bitterness. The final reflection: in the quiet years after Jason's death, I often found myself reflecting on our journey. There were still moments when the pain of the past resurfaced, but they were fleeting, overshadowed by the gratitude I felt for the time we had reclaimed. Forgiveness hadn't come easily, and it hadn't come quickly, but it had come, and it had changed everything. It had transformed a broken family into a stronger one, built on a foundation of resilience and love. A new chapter. Beyond the legacy life, after Jason's passing, felt different, as though a piece of the puzzle had been quietly removed. But rather than leaving a void, it created a space filled with reflection and gratitude. Jason's life and redemption had become a central thread in the tapestry of our family's story, a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and the capacity for growth. Lily, as the torchbearer, Lily carried Jason's memory like a torch. She often spoke of him to her children, sharing stories of the lessons he had taught her. She told them how he had turned his life around, how he had faced his mistakes with humility, and how he had worked tirelessly to rebuild the trust he had broken. One day, while visiting me with her 2 children, she sat beside me on the porch. The kids were playing in the yard, their laughter carried on the breeze. "Dad," she said, her tone serious yet warm, "I've been thinking about Uncle Jason a lot lately, about everything he taught me, and I want to do something to honor him." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to start a foundation," she said. "Something that helps people like the ones Uncle Jason worked with. People who've hit rock bottom but are trying to get back on their feet. I want his legacy to live on." Her words brought a lump to my throat. "He'd be proud of you, Lily. I'm proud of you." We spent the next few hours brainstorming ideas for the foundation. Lily decided to call it Second Chances, a name that felt fitting for Jason's story and the mission of the organization. Over the next year, she poured her heart into building the foundation, and soon it became a beacon of hope for people seeking redemption and a fresh start. Ethan's final years. As the years went by, I found myself becoming the family's storyteller, the keeper of our history. At every gathering, my grandchildren and great-grandchildren would crowd around me, begging for stories about the past. "Tell us about Uncle Jason," they'd say, their eyes wide with curiosity. And so I would, weaving tales of his missteps, his redemption, and the bond we had rebuilt. I told them about the lessons he had taught me, that people are more than their worst mistakes, that forgiveness is a gift as much for the giver as it is for the receiver, and that love is what holds us together, even when it feels like everything is falling apart. One day, as I sat in my rocking chair with my youngest great-grandchild on my lap, I realized how far we had come as a family. The pain of the past had been transformed into a story of hope, one that would live on long after I was gone. A full circle moment. On what would have been Jason's 80th birthday, the family gathered at the shelter where he had spent so many years, helping others. Lily had arranged for a plaque to be placed in his honor, and as we stood in the small courtyard, surrounded by the people whose lives he had touched, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The plaque read, "Jason Carter, a life. Redeemed, a legacy of love and second chances." As I read the words, tears filled my eyes. Jason's journey hadn't been an easy one, but it had been meaningful, and in the end, he had left the world a better place than he had found it. Ethan's final reflection. In the twilight of my life, I often found myself reflecting on the long road we had traveled as a family. The story of Jason and me was one of pain and betrayal, yes, but also of healing and love. It was a reminder that life isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about what you do after you make them. One evening, as I sat by the fire with my family, gathered around me, I told them my final lesson. Life will test you. It will break your heart, challenge your faith, and force you to confront the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that love is always worth fighting for. And forgiveness, true forgiveness, can change everything. As I spoke, I looked around at the faces of my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They were my legacy, and through them, Jason's story would live on. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as I closed my eyes, I knew that the story of our family, the story of love, forgiveness, and second chances, would continue for generations to come. The circle of forgiveness continues. The years that followed my passing saw the family carry forward the lessons that had been passed down through generations. Second chances, the foundation that Lily had built in Jason's memory, flourished into an organization that had a lasting impact on countless lives. It became a network of support, not only for people in need of second chances, but also for those who needed guidance on their own paths to forgiveness and redemption. The Foundation's growth and the mentorship program. As the years progressed, Lily expanded the Foundation into a full-fledged mentorship program, one that mirrored the very journey she and Jason had gone through. The program became a beacon for those struggling to break free from cycles of addiction, crime, or poverty, offering not just practical skills, but emotional and psychological support as well. One of the most remarkable aspects of the program was the way in which it mirrored Jason's approach. Individuals who had turned their lives around, like David, the man who had once been a client, were now the ones mentoring others. This full-circle moment became a powerful reminder of the Foundation's purpose, not only helping people rebuild their lives, but also showing them that they, too, could become pillars of strength for others. Lily's vision for the next generation. Lily became known as one of the leading voices in social justice and rehabilitation programs. She expanded second chances into various cities, working with government officials and private organizations to influence policies that would make it easier for those with criminal backgrounds or troubled pasts to reintegrate into society. She knew that the Foundation's work could not end with the individual, but needed to ripple out into the world, influencing systemic change. And so, she continued to champion legislation that would provide rehabilitation services, better job opportunities, and support for reintegration, knowing that the real fight was to create a world where second chances weren't just a gift, they were a right. Ben and his role in the Foundation. As Lily's children grew older, they too became involved in the Foundation's work. Ben, my great-grandson in particular, had always been fascinated by the stories of family, legacy, and second chances. He often volunteered at Second Chances, helping with outreach programs and organizing events. One day, Ben sat down with Lily, having just completed his degree in social work. "I want to take the next step," he said, his tone earnest. "I want to help people who have been through the worst of it. I want to be a mentor, just like David, just like Uncle Jason." Lily smiled, her eyes glinting with pride. "You're ready." "Ben, you've got the heart for it." Ben began working with the mentorship program, guiding young people who were struggling to find their footing in the world. He shared stories of his great-grandfather, of Jason, and the lessons they had all learned. He became a voice of compassion for those seeking their own second chance, a reminder that it wasn't too late to change, no matter how lost they felt. A new beginning for the next generation. As time passed, the ripple effect of the family's legacy continued to grow. My great-grandchildren, too, grew up knowing the importance of forgiveness and redemption. Each one had heard the stories of Jason and the lessons we had all learned, and they carried those lessons into their own lives. One of my great-granddaughters, Ava, became a lawyer, working pro bono to defend individuals who had been unfairly incarcerated. She often spoke of the impact her great-grandfather had on her, how his story of redemption had shaped her own desire to fight for justice for those who had made mistakes but deserved a second chance. The legacy continues through future generations. The years moved forward, but the foundation that Jason, Lily, and I had started continued to thrive. It became more than just a place. It became a movement, one that embodied the very essence of our family's journey, that mistakes don't define us, and that the capacity for change lies within every person, waiting to be unlocked. Jason's memory lived on not just in the lives he touched directly, but in the ripple effects that continued through the actions of those who came after him. His story became a story of hope, of overcoming adversity, and of the extraordinary strength it takes to forgive, to heal, and to rebuild. A final reflection. On a quiet evening, years after my passing, the family gathered once again. This time, it wasn't for a funeral or a memorial. It was for a celebration of life, a family reunion where we honored the living legacy of forgiveness and redemption. As we sat around the dinner table surrounded by generations of my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, I realized something profound. The true legacy of our family wasn't just in the work we had done. The legacy expands beyond the family. As the years moved forward, second chances and the lessons of redemption continued to spread far beyond our immediate family. What started as a foundation in Jason's honor grew into a nationwide movement, one that impacted people's lives in profound ways. People from all walks of life, those struggling with addiction, those coming out of prison, and those looking to rebuild after a major life crisis, found a place of support and transformation at the foundation. Through the mentorship program, those who had once been clients themselves, like David and Ben, now stood at the front of classrooms, workshops, and counseling sessions, helping others see the same hope that had been extended to them. A global impact. One day, while reviewing the progress of Second Chances, Lily received an invitation that would change the trajectory of the foundation. A global nonprofit organization had heard of the work they were doing and asked if they would collaborate on an international campaign for rehabilitation, support, and integration of former offenders into society. The thought of expanding to a global scale was daunting, but Lily, with her tenacity and belief in the mission, knew that this was the next step in Jason's legacy. And so, with her team, they began to work on the logistics, funding, and partnerships necessary to expand beyond their borders. Months later, Second Chances began to host international workshops and collaborate with organizations in different countries. They spoke at global conferences, sharing the message that everyone, no matter their past, deserved a chance at a new beginning. The success of the international expansion was remarkable. In many countries, Second Chances became synonymous with rehabilitation and hope, and the principles Jason had lived by were echoed across the world. People who had once been hopeless found pathways to reintegrate into society, and many went on to become leaders, advocates, and mentors themselves. The inheritance of hope. As the foundation grew, Lily's children, including Ben, took on more leadership roles. Ben, now a young man in his late 30s, had found his calling as a mentor and counselor. His ability to connect with troubled youth had become legendary, and he had become a pillar of the Second Chances community, providing a sense of stability and direction to those who needed it most. One day, as Ben sat in his office, reviewing new applications for the mentorship program, he reflected on how far everything had come. He thought about the struggles of his great-grandfather Jason and how his redemption had sparked a movement that would never end. As Ben stood to leave for his evening shift at the Foundation's shelter, he looked at a photo of his great-grandfather on the wall, Jason's face frozen in a moment of quiet reflection. Ben knew that the work they had started was far from finished. It was a legacy that would continue, carried forward by every person who ever found the courage to believe in a second chance. The next generation embraces the torch. The story of redemption was now being woven into the lives of yet another generation, Ben's own children, who had grown up in the shadow of Second Chances and its growing influence, had taken up their own cause. One of his daughters, Isla, a gifted artist, began using her work to raise awareness about addiction and mental health. She collaborated with the Foundation on art therapy programs, where she used painting and sculpture to help clients express their emotions and begin the healing process. Isla's work became widely recognized, and soon her art was showcased in galleries, paired with the stories of those whose lives had been transformed by second chances. In her own way, she had found a way to contribute to the legacy of healing, blending creativity with advocacy. A gathering to reflect on the journey. Years later, in a moment of reflection, the family decided to hold a grand gathering, not only to honor the Foundation's success, but to celebrate the full journey of healing, redemption, and the ongoing legacy of Jason's life. The gathering was held at the very shelter where Jason had once mentored others, now a hub of activity and support, filled with people whose lives had been changed by the work of the Foundation. As the family arrived, each person's heart swelled with gratitude. There was Ben, now a seasoned mentor, guiding new faces through the doors of second chances. Isla, with her art displayed in the gallery for all to see. And Lily, now a recognized figure in social justice, whose tireless efforts had shaped the Foundation into a symbol of hope and transformation. The walls of the shelter, once echoing with sorrow and despair, now buzzed with the energy of possibility. Lily took the stage to speak, her voice unwavering as she addressed the crowd. Jason taught us that it's never too late to start over. The ripples of transformation. Stories of change across the world. As second chances expanded into new corners of the world, the personal stories that emerged from the Foundation's work became as varied and profound as the individuals who walked through its doors. From the streets of New York to the villages in Africa, from the bustling cities of Europe to the far-flung regions of Asia, Jason's legacy continued to inspire transformation. Each individual who found their second chance added their own chapter to the ever-growing tapestry of hope and healing. A new beginning in New York City. In the heart of New York City, a man named Carlos walked into a second chance's office with nothing but the clothes on his back and the heavy weight of his past. Carlos had spent most of his adult life in and out of prison for drug-related offenses. After his release, he struggled to find steady work, often falling back into old habits and a life of crime to survive. He had all but given up on himself. It was during a particularly low point when he had nowhere else to turn that he found himself standing outside the doors of second chances. The first person he met was Mark, a former gang member who had once faced similar struggles but had now become a mentor at the Foundation. Mark's story resonated deeply with Carlos, and after a series of counseling sessions and life coaching, Carlos began to find a new sense of purpose. He enrolled in the Foundation's career training program, which provided the tools he needed to find a steady job and re-enter the workforce with dignity. But it wasn't just a job that Carlos needed. It was a renewed sense of hope. Through his time at Second Chances, he learned not only how to build a career, but how to rebuild his self-worth. With the support of the team, Carlos found a job as a mechanic, a field he had always wanted to work in but never thought he could achieve. Carlos's story quickly became one of the most powerful examples of the Foundation's reach in New York. When he spoke at a local outreach event, he told the audience, "I never thought I would have a second chance. I thought my story was over. But this place, this community, it taught me that I'm not my mistakes. I'm someone who can rebuild." A new path in Uganda. From despair to empowerment. Thousands of miles away in Uganda, a young woman named Amina had faced challenges far beyond what many could imagine. Born into a family struggling with poverty, Amina had been forced into marriage at a young age. She experienced years of abuse and isolation, but with the support of a local NGO, Amina eventually found the courage to leave. However, leaving her abuser was only the first step on a long and difficult road. She had no formal education, no job skills, and no support system. It was in this fragile state that Amina came across a Second Chances program that had recently expanded into Uganda. The foundation's local partners helped her get into a skills training program for women, teaching her how to sew and create garments. Amina's journey was not easy, and it wasn't quick. But with each day she spent at the workshop, she began to rebuild not only her skill set, but her confidence. As her sewing business grew, she began employing other women in similar situations, offering them the same second chance she had been given. Years later, Amina stood in front of a crowd at an international summit hosted by Second Chances in Nairobi, sharing her story with the world. "I came from nothing," she said, her voice filled with strength. "But now I stand before you as a woman who is not defined by her past, but by the future she is building for herself and others." Her business became a symbol of empowerment, and soon Amina was invited to speak at global forums on gender equality, sharing the work Second Chances had done to lift her out of despair and into a position of leadership. The digital transformation. Reaching the isolated back in the United States, Ben had recognized a critical shift in society, the increasing reliance on technology and the internet, especially in the wake of global crises like the pandemic. He knew that the next frontier of Second Chances wasn't just physical, it was digital. The foundation began investing in an online platform that would offer virtual mentorship, career development programs, and support networks to people who were geographically isolated or unable to attend physical programs. This digital expansion gave rise to the Second Chances online community, a vibrant network that allowed individuals from every corner of the world to connect, share their stories, and find guidance. Among the first participants in the online program was a man named Raj, living in a small village in India. Raj had been ostracized by his community for his involvement in a minor crime as a young man. For years, he lived in isolation, working low-paying jobs just to make ends meet. The everlasting journey, a legacy in motion. As the years passed, the story of Second Chances continued to unfold, with each new chapter adding to the profound impact that Jason's vision had created. However, as with any living movement, the Yale organization faced new challenges, moments of reflection, and opportunities for growth that required the dedication of every individual who had become part of it. The foundation, now a beacon of hope, was no longer just about offering second chances. It was about maintaining a sustainable future for everyone involved. The challenge of growth, maintaining integrity in a changing world. As Second Chances expanded its reach, it faced the inevitable challenge of maintaining its core values while scaling to meet the increasing demand for its services. Ben, now at the helm as the leader of the organization, recognized that the more successful the foundation became, the more delicate the balance of preserving its heart and soul would become. The expansion into new territories had brought a flood of applications, people, from every corner of the globe, each with a unique story, a need for healing, and a desire for transformation. The programs had to adapt to regional cultural contexts, the economic realities of different countries, and the technological advances that were rapidly changing the way people accessed help. But as the growth of the organization took on a life of its own, Ben remained committed to ensuring that the integrity of Jason's vision was never lost. "There's a reason we've built this legacy on personal connection," Ben explained during a board meeting. "It's about understanding that each individual is more than a case file. They are a person with dreams, struggles, and the potential for change. We can't lose sight of that." One of the ways the team adapted was by developing regional leaders, individuals who understood the unique challenges of their communities and who could ensure that the programs were both relevant and impactful. These leaders, handpicked from those who had been helped by Second Chances in the past, became the embodiment of the Foundation's mission, people who had risen from the ashes of their own struggles and who were now helping others do the same. A new chapter, the Global Fellowship for Transformation. In an effort to expand its outreach while maintaining its personalized touch, Second Chances launched a new initiative, the Global Fellowship for Transformation. This fellowship brought together leaders, innovators, and changemakers from all over the world who were passionate about the cause of second chances. The fellowship aimed to unite the collective efforts of those who had first-hand experience with the power of transformation, as well as those who were just beginning their journey. The fellowship was designed not only as a leadership program, but as a movement of empowerment. Participants would be mentored by top-tier leaders in the nonprofit and social justice sectors and would also contribute to the ongoing development of new programs. By sharing resources, knowledge, and personal stories of overcoming adversity, the fellowship helped expand the network of people dedicated to the cause, building bridges between nations, cultures, and communities. Among the first cohort was a young woman named Emily, who had grown up in a small town in Australia and struggled with addiction for much of her adolescence. After finding second chances and completing a rehabilitation program, she was inspired to create a similar initiative back home. Her journey through the fellowship allowed her to meet like-minded individuals from across the globe and learn from their experiences. I came into this fellowship with the hope of making a small difference in my own community, Emily reflected during a meeting with her cohort. But now I see that second chances isn't just about individuals, it's about creating a world where second chances are the norm, not the exception. And that's something bigger than any one of us. Emily's vision of creating a global network of local leaders resonated deeply with the fellowship, inspiring the team to develop partnerships with international governments, universities, and corporations to further integrate the concept of second chances into education, public policy, and corporate responsibility. The generational shift, a new family legacy. As time passed, the family that had founded Second Chances began to evolve. Ben, now a seasoned leader, had taken steps to ensure that the future of the organization would remain rooted in its original mission, even as it grew. His children, Isla and Noah, had grown into adults who were both deeply involved in the foundation's work. Isla, in particular, had embraced the role of a storyteller. Her gift for weaving narratives became a powerful tool for raising awareness about the issues faced by those seeking second chances. Everyone has a story. The ripple continues, new horizons, new challenges. As Second Chances spread its wings further, the challenges ahead were not just about overcoming logistical hurdles or growing its network. They were about maintaining the integrity of its mission in a world that was constantly shifting. The rapid pace of technological advancement, global crises, and a rising awareness of systemic inequality created a landscape that demanded innovation, patience, and wisdom. Ben, Isla, and Noah, each of them more seasoned now, had come to understand that their mission was evolving into something far more intricate. What had once started as a local grassroots effort was now a global initiative, and it carried with it both immense responsibility and unprecedented opportunity. The struggle to stay grounded. One of the most pressing concerns was how to stay grounded in the face of such monumental success. Second Chances was no longer just a nonprofit. It was a movement. Its digital platforms reached millions. Its outreach programs had expanded to dozens of countries, and its mentors were seen as experts in social justice and rehabilitation. With the increased visibility came an inevitable pressure to perform, to grow faster, to fix more problems. The very essence of what Jason had envisioned, the personal, deeply human connection that was the foundation of the work, began to feel at risk. Isla and Noah found themselves often debating how to preserve the personal touch while still addressing the growing need. Isla, in particular, feared that the increased use of digital tools might alienate those who needed the most intimate forms of support. "We can't just be another app," she would often say. "We're not just here to provide services. We're here to change lives, one person, one story at a time." Noah, the tech visionary, understood her concerns, but also saw the power of technology to amplify their impact. Yes, but the digital tools we're using are giving us access to people who would never have had the chance to seek help otherwise. Think of it this way. Our virtual network isn't replacing human connection, it's multiplying it. We're not losing the soul of second chances, we're expanding it. Despite their differences, both Ben and Isla knew that finding balance was key to the future of the foundation. They spent countless hours refining the organization's approach, blending the personal with the digital, the one-on-one mentorship with the virtual communities, ensuring that every individual who reached out for help would feel seen, heard, and valued. A world in crisis, the rising tide of global inequality. In the midst of the Foundation's growth, the world was undergoing profound changes that presented new challenges. The rise of global inequality, political instability, and environmental disasters created a reality where people in many regions were facing overwhelming odds. The demands on second chances grew, and so too did the urgency of its mission. In certain regions, the need for intervention was becoming more dire by the day. In areas ravaged by conflict, such as the Middle East and parts of Africa, displaced individuals were not only battling the loss of their homes, but also trying to rebuild their sense of self-worth. In Eastern Europe, where economic instability had reached crisis levels, people who had once enjoyed a stable life now faced unemployment, addiction, and despair. The question that Ben, Isla, and Noah faced now was how to address these systemic issues on a global scale while staying true to the individualistic, restorative model that had made second chances so successful. The Foundation's leaders knew that the future wouldn't be easy, but they had learned from their past struggles that even the most difficult circumstances could be met with innovation, compassion, and a commitment to community. As Ben sat at his desk one evening, reflecting on the broader picture, he spoke to his family. "We have the means and we have the tools, but we need to think differently about how we reach people, how we reach entire communities. It's not just about the one-on-one approach anymore. We need to focus on larger, systemic change as well." Noah, who had been working with tech companies and governments to expand the digital platform's reach, replied, "We've always been about small, personal connections, but maybe now it's time to amplify that. It's time to start partnering with larger institutions, governments, corporations, even other nonprofits, to create more structural changes. We've proven we can change lives on an individual level. Now it's time to tackle the bigger problems." Isla's voice broke through the silence. "We can't forget where we came from, though. We have to remember that at the heart of all of this, it's about people. It's about real lives. We need to be careful not to become so large that we lose our humanity." The global expansion, partnerships for systemic change. With a new sense of urgency, the journey of continuity, challenges and triumphs in the modern age. As second chances stretched its reach across the globe, it became evident that even the most well-intentioned efforts would face challenges. With every triumph, there came new obstacles, often unforeseen and daunting. But at the heart of it all was the resilience that had been a cornerstone of the Foundation's story from the very beginning. Crisis and response, the fragility of progress. In the midst of the Foundation's ongoing success, the world faced unexpected crises that threatened to unravel the very fabric of society. Political upheaval, economic recessions, and increasingly, devastating natural disasters wreaked havoc on vulnerable communities around the world. In some regions, the needs of the people became overwhelming, and second chances found itself at a crossroads. How could it continue to scale its efforts without compromising its deeply held values of individual care and support? A major turning point came when a massive earthquake struck a coastal city, leaving thousands displaced and without basic necessities. The local infrastructure was devastated, and the lives of countless families were upended. In the wake of the disaster, Second Chances was among the first organizations to respond, providing emergency aid, temporary shelter, and mental health counseling. However, it wasn't long before the scale of the disaster revealed the cracks in the foundation's ability to maintain its model of personal mentorship and rehabilitation at such a vast scale. Ben, Isla, and Noah convened with their leadership team to devise a response that would be both compassionate and sustainable. I never imagined we'd be in a position where the sheer scale of need could overwhelm what we've built, Ben admitted during a tense strategy meeting. How do we keep the soul of second chances when the needs are so vast? Isla, ever. The compassionate leader responded, "We start by remembering that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, we don't lose sight of what's at the heart of this. Individuals. Yes, there are large-scale systems to address, but we can't forget that each person who comes to us for help is a person we're here to support." The leadership team worked tirelessly to form partnerships with other relief organizations, government agencies, and local leaders to provide immediate help. But they also knew that the road to recovery would be long and required a careful, thoughtful response that balanced urgent needs with sustainable support. "We can't just offer temporary relief," Noah argued. "We need to help these communities rebuild from the inside out. That means offering them the tools to heal, not just from the disaster, but from the systemic issues that made them vulnerable in the first place." And so, Second Chances partnered with local governments to create long-term recovery programs that included vocational training, emotional counseling, and initiatives to rebuild social infrastructure. It was a monumental task, but the Foundation's commitment to its core principles, compassion, empowerment, and resilience, guided its response. A global network of hope, new partnerships, and outreach. Despite the challenges, the vision that Jason had instilled in the organization continued to expand. With each new disaster or setback came the opportunity to forge stronger, more diverse partnerships. Second Chances didn't just react to crises, it became a proactive force in building a global network of hope. A particularly groundbreaking partnership emerged with major corporations that saw the benefit in aligning themselves with Second Chance's mission. They recognized that supporting such a transformative cause not only created a positive social impact, but also aligned with their own values of corporate social responsibility. One such partnership with a tech giant led to the creation of an innovative platform, an AI-powered mentorship program that could match individuals with mentors based on their specific needs and goals. This platform was designed to reach people in remote areas who may not have had access to in-person counseling or support, but still needed a guiding hand to navigate their struggles. The development of this platform became a crucial part of Second Chance's strategy for addressing the ever-increasing demand for services. But it wasn't just about technology. It was about ensuring that technology was a tool, not a replacement, for the human connection at the heart of the Foundation's work. Isla, whose passion for storytelling had never waned, took to the virtual stage to tell the stories of those who had been helped by this new digital mentorship program. Her work in bridging the personal with the digital became an essential part of the Foundation's outreach, creating an emotional connection between people around the world, even in the digital age.